What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the J Area Podcast. My name is Jose, and on today's episode, we have big news as the San Francisco 49ers capture the NFC West division and a guaranteed spot in this year's playoffs following a 21-13 victory against the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle, for that matter, a place that they struggled to get a win in for some time. Since 2010, this is now their third victory, winning in Seattle. Again, an area that is very difficult to play in given that the 12th man is such a factor for the opposition. The San Francisco 49ers sweep the Seattle Seahawks for the first time since 2011, back when Alex Smith and Jim Harbaugh were with the San Francisco 49ers. It was a very big game, a very big night for San Francisco as they were able to dispatch their all-time rival in division with the Seattle Seahawks. And given that Brock Purdy and George Kittle were able to connect on 2 touchdowns on the night, accompanied by a touchdown by Christian McCaffrey, the 49er offense is firing on all cylinders, given that Deebo Samuel is missing some time due to his injury to his MCL and his ankle. The Niners train continues to roll rampant as their defense, as stellar as it has been all year, limited their opponent to just 13 points. Not unlike their game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which was this past Sunday, as they limited them to just 7 points, at one point being up 35-0. I think the San Francisco 49ers are running on, quite frankly, the run of the season at this point. They are now on their third quarterback after losing Trey Lance early in the season, then Jimmy Garoppolo just a couple of weeks ago against Miami. But now with Brock Purdy, who at this rate was an unknown. Many recognized him as the Mr. Irrelevant of the 2022 NFL draft. He was the final pick in the draft, the 7th quarterback taken in this year's draft. And how ironic is it? And I bring this up with a lot of my friends and my family, but how ironic is it that for a season that many anticipated to be a Super Bowl or bust season for the 49ers, it was going to come down to the quarterback position and whether or not the Niners were going to side with Jimmy Garoppolo, who was a proven starter in this league. He won the NFC in 2019 and made an appearance in the Super Bowl, ultimately losing to the Kansas City Chiefs. Or, because of his limitations, the Niners had to look into the draft and they picked up Trey Lance with the 3rd overall pick, something that had a little bit more upside and also a lot more athletic ability than a Jimmy Garoppolo. So for the offseason, many speculated, and quite frankly, it seemed like it was confirmed that Trey Lance would be the starter of the future and would lead this offense to the promised land, if you will. But given his limitations at the quarterback position due to his injuries as well as his inexperience, Trey Lance would suffer an injury early on in the season, thus leading to Jimmy Garoppolo regaining the starting position. And quite frankly, I thought he played his best ball with the Niners this season. Up until his injury, of course, against Miami, Jimmy Garoppolo was playing a clean game. He wasn't turning the ball over. He took control of the offense. He helped score. Of course, one of my biggest complaints, and you can go back into the archive episodes, that I would bring up that for a team that had guys like Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, we weren't putting up too many points. At one point, we were averaging about 23 points a game. And for a team with as many as offensive weapons as we have, and with an offensive-minded coach like we have, I thought, this is definitely a team that is capable of doing so much more, especially with a quality defense that DeMeco Ryans has been able to produce this season, which, by the way, ranks number 1 in literally almost every category. You want to talk about yards allowed, points allowed, rushing yards allowed, passing yards allowed. There was even a statistic that I saw earlier that the Niners, I think as of right now following the Seattle game, have allowed 12 passing touchdowns, and they have actually thrown for about 16 passing touchdowns. They're the only team in the league to have thrown for more passing touchdowns than their defense is allowing, only further demonstrating the success and the dominance that this defense has had. And quite frankly, I think that Nick Bosa, if he's not considered, he definitely should be the NFL Defensive Player of the Year. For his contributions to this team, he's leading the league with 15.5 sacks on the season. Just his presence on the defensive line and the pressure he's able to get to the other opposition's quarterback it cannot be overstated. And I think if he does not receive at least a wealthy amount of votes, it'll be a crime, an injustice. But me personally, again, I'm not trying to be biased, but I do think that Nick Bosa has definitely earned his spot as the Defensive Player of the Year. But of course, to run it back to the Seattle game, Brock Purdy, throughout the game, and of course, given that my work schedule, I was able to catch the complete second half. I had to run back and see the highlights of the first half, but Brock Purdy just seems confident. This guy seems so comfortable in the offense. He's able to make plays. Again, he's not asked to be the Patrick Mahomes or the Tom Brady or the Lamar Jackson, the ultimate competitor and really save this team. What he's tasked with is to ensure that the playmakers, the guys like Ayuk, McCaffrey, Kittle, Debo when he comes back, he's tasked with ensuring that these guys get the ball. Have your best players make the best plays. And I think that's been very evident these last couple of games with Brock Purdy. Again, you want to talk about a guy who has a lot of composure and is poised in this offense. One interesting note to make of, he had spent all 4 of his years in college, playing for the Iowa, State team. And I think that's a very big proponent as to why he has been able to really take into this offense that Kyle Shanahan has created, which, by the way, is an offense that is very quarterback friendly because it's tasked with the run game. And combining that with the defense, it is just a match made in heaven as to the success that Brock Purdy has been able to achieve these last couple games. And as I'm watching, the story unfold with Brock Purdy and how he's able to command this offense while also relying on a strong defense. Quite frankly, I think the best defense, again, I mentioned, statistically, it is the best defense. But I think when you look at it at all phases of it, whether it is the defensive line, the linebackers, the secondary, I think it's quite frankly the best defense in football. I remember last week I had made a comparison to that of the Kurt Warner story, where you had a guy like Trent Green who was going to be running the St. Louis Rams offense, develop an injury early on in the season, and Dick Vermeil, Hall of Fame coach, Super Bowl winning coach, you remember the quote that we will rally around Kurt Warner and we will play good football. And they go on to have this Cinderella story. They have one of the greatest offensives in NFL history. They move on into the Super Bowl. They ultimately win with 1 yard short, stopping the Tennessee Titans and Aaron McNair back in '99. And I think one interesting point that I had seen, I believe it was on Thursday Night Football, the post game, someone had made reference to the New England Patriots, in that Tom Brady, in his second year as a starter, or with his first year as a starter, his second year in the league, he comes in for Drew Bledsoe and is tasked with managing one of the really unknown teams at that moment. They had a great defense. They were widely known for their defense and their run game. But he's curious filling in for a guy, Drew Bledsoe, who was given a huge contract, was expected to be the quarterback of the New England Patriots moving forward, even so as having a Super Bowl appearance against the Green Bay Packers at Super Bowl 31, which ultimately they would lose to the Green Bay Packers. And again, maintaining that sense of consistency, wasn't a bad quarterback, but wasn't really all that spectacular, let's be honest. And he was given a big contract, he suffers an injury, and in comes the unknown Tom Brady, who again, fell into the draft, was the 199th pick in the draft. Not many people knew who he was. Not many people expected him to reach the success that he had reached, let alone any success. I mean, they didn't think he would win the Super Bowl, let alone win 7 Super Bowls in his entire career. Fast forward to 2022, Jimmy Garoppolo, again, not one of the ultra great quarterbacks in this league, a capable quarterback, I will say, but let's be honest, not one of the ultra, super athletic or elite quarterbacks, if you will. Given a huge contract early on in his career, reaches a Super Bowl, ultimately would lose it to a gunslinger like Patrick Mahomes, not unlike a Brett Favre with the Green Bay Packers back in '96. And he suffers an injury. And it's not the first injury either. It's quite a few injuries he has sustained over the course of his career. But after sustaining that injury, we have to move forward. And in comes Brock Purdy, the final pick in the 2022 draft, Mr. Irrelevant. Again, not many people expecting too much from the kid, given that he hadn't had a lot of experience in the NFL, a lot of experience in college football, though. Again, like I mentioned, 4 years in college football, coming in to helm a team that is run dominant and also has the best defense in the league. Now, I'm not going on the record and saying that he's going to be the next Tom Brady, and I'm not going on the record to say that these Niners are the next incarnation of the New England Patriots, but sometimes the NFL has a funny way of working itself into a circle, and that is how life is a cycle, and history, in a way, can repeat itself. Again, maybe some folks will think I'm biased because this is my team, but at the end of the day, I think it's interesting to look at it from a lens of a broader lens, I should really say. You get a sense that, hey, if it could happen back then, 20 years ago, Tom Brady, an unknown from Michigan, why not Brock? Why not Brock Purdy? Because when you look at this team and the way it is currently constructed, you have a run game that is one of the best run games, one of the best and consistent run game in the league, given you have guys like Elijah Mitchell, unfortunately he's out with an injury, Jordan Mason, who is a powerful back that they utilize towards the end of games, and of course Christian McCaffrey, who should go on, who, quite frankly, you don't really have to say that much, just the name Christian McCaffrey accounts for it in itself. Combine that with offensive weapons like Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and a litany of other weapons that they have in their arsenal who have specialized in the ability to obtain yak, yards after the catch. Combine that with the offensive mindset of Kyle Shanahan, who has learned from his father, Mike Shanahan, and a proven system that has worked not only in the Denver Broncos, but also with the San Francisco 49ers back in '94. And then on top of that, with the cherry on top, you have the best defense in the league. A defense that, again, I think defense wins championships. I think it's the cornerstone of any championship team. You look at some of the greatest teams of all time, whether it's the '85 Bears, the 2000s Ravens, the 2015 Denver Broncos, the 2013 Seattle Seahawks. Some of these teams are legendary. I mean, you even look at the Steel Curtain, the '70s Pittsburgh Steelers. Every time there is a dynasty or some kind of just dominant franchise, it starts with the defense. I just mentioned the New England Patriots when they first started. They weren't known as an offensive juggernaut. They were the defense. They had guys that were able to, get to the quarterback, get the ball back for their offense. And I think that's a proven recipe for many teams to consider. You look at guys like the Dallas Cowboys currently, who have, again, an elite defense. The Philadelphia Eagles, no slouch. The Buffalo Bills, another solid defense. Defense wins championships, and if you're not able to get the ball back and prevent the other team from scoring, your chances of winning a game, let alone winning a championship, drastically go down. So to see how these Niners have been performing, and now on a 7-game winning streak, it definitely allows me to take a deep breath and recognize that, hey, although we really shouldn't take our foot off the gas, but it's kind of giving you that sense of like, hey, we're doing something right. With this victory, they have won 7 in a row, with a current record of 10 wins and 4 losses. 2 of those losses we should not have even lost, and that was the Chicago's Bear game and the Denver Broncos game. 2 games that I just definitely think we should not have lost, and they will currently stay on my mind every time I see our record. But given that we have 10 wins, we have now clinched the Nfcwest division, guaranteeing us a spot in the playoffs and having at least one home playoff game. As we enter the weekend, the Minnesota Vikings will be taking on the Indianapolis Colts, and the Minnesota Vikings are 1 seed above us, also with 10 wins. If they lose this game, which I mean, it's probably not likely. They're a better ran organization, and they have a better team talent-wise than the Colts. But if for some reason the Indianapolis Colts and Jeff Saturday are able to pull off the upset, and they lose, and they fall to 10-4, just like the Niners, they fall to the 3rd seed, and the Niners will leapfrog them due to conference wins in the NFC, because currently Minnesota has 6 wins, we have 8 wins. we would leapfrog them into the second seed, thus garnering 2 home playoff games, which is huge in itself. Because with this defense and playing at home with the record that we have, I believe we only have 1 loss at home. And even then, it wasn't a game we should have lost because that was the Bronco game. But as I mentioned, with this defense at home, the Niners would be a very scary team to be competing with in January football games. I've gone on the record and I've said, if this team is able to pull it off, I will no hesitation get a tattoo of Brock Purdy. Perhaps on my bicep. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But this team, I dare say, is better than the 2019 team that we saw a couple of years ago. Because our veterans now are like Debo, Brandon, you have Juszczyk, Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner. I mean, the list goes on. And on top of that, the young guys that we had in 2019 have now developed a sense of experience. And they recognize that it's not easy going to the Super Bowl. Following that, we were riddled with injuries in 2020. And then 2021, we make the NFC Championship game, but ultimately lose to the Super Bowl champion, LA Rams. They've gone through heartbreak. They've gone through things. And it's important to recognize that sometimes it's not easy to get back to the mountaintop. You have to learn how to lose in order to really win. And to see the development that this franchise has had in such a short time, because if you remember, 6 years ago, in 2016, we had Chip Kelly as a head coach and only won 2 games. At the bottom of the barrel, like we were one of the worst teams in the league. The franchise was going nowhere. People were calling for Jed York's job, and being able to hire a guy like Kyle Shanahan with an NFL pedigree in his family, such as Mike Shanahan, as well as having the experience that he has with Atlanta, and turning this around with a general manager who had no prior experience with John Lynch, and to see what they've done with this franchise and to turn them into a competitive force in such a short time, because they come in 2017 and again not looking the best. They make a trade on Halloween in 2017 for Jimmy Garoppolo, who ultimately finishes the year with 5 straight wins, and they finish with 6 wins on the season. Then in 2018, they're poised to make some noise, but because of an ACL tear in the second game against the Kansas City Chiefs, they are unable to capitalize on the momentum they gained at the end of 2017, and they finish with only 4 wins. 4 wins that would garner them the second pick in the NFL draft, that would turn into Nick Bosa out of Ohio State University. And in 2019, we all know that story. They won 13 games. They reached the Super Bowl 54, ultimately would lose to the Kansas City Chiefs. And in 3 years, as an organization with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, they developed themselves into a Super Bowl contender. Of course, following that, a lot of people had them high on their Super Bowl lists. But in 2020, they would be riddled with injuries and again would fall, I believe, to 6 wins. And it was tough. That team was, again, you had guys like Bosa was out, Jimmy was out, George was out for the majority of the year. And it was tough. It was a tough season to go through. And quite frankly, a season that I try to forget at times. Especially the year 2020, given everything that happened with the coronavirus and, the time that we had to spend in lockdown and in quarantine. But following that, in 2021, they fall to 3-5 in their first 8 games of the season. And many people are writing them off, and they're thinking, this team, what are they doing? They don't know what they're doing. They go to the Super Bowl once, they get injured the next year, and it was a fluke. And they do the unthinkable, and they run off a number of wins. They run the table. They finish with 10 wins. And they reached the NFC Championship. Again, a game that they should not have reached. But towards the end of that season, they had reached a peak where they became a dangerous team that nobody should have wanted to face. The Dallas Cowboys experienced that in the wild card round. The Green Bay Packers experienced that in the divisional round. And ultimately, the LA Rams were able to dispose of those Niners come last year, en route to a Super Bowl victory at the hands of the Cincinnati Bengals. And now in 2022, after having their backup quarterback, Trey Lance, sit behind Jimmy Garoppolo and see what he was able to do with that team. Everyone looks to the future and they think, well, Trey Lance is our guy. He's going to lead us to the future. He's going to be the young quarterback that will helm this offense and lead them to multiple Super Bowls and a number of successes. And then he gets injured. And after his injury, Jimmy comes in. And he's kind of shaky at first, obviously, because he wasn't given a playbook during the preseason because no one anticipated him to be a part of the franchise. They thought, you know what, we'll be able to cut our ties with him. He'll move on and hopefully flourish in another franchise. But that wasn't the case because Jimmy would actually perform pretty well, actually. I mean, it was probably one of his best runs as a 49er. And after a crushing defeat where they allowed the Kansas City Chiefs to score 44 points, at the trade deadline, they are able to garner the talents of Christian McCaffrey. And since then, they've gone on the 7-game winning streak that I've mentioned. But ultimately, Jimmy Garoppolo suffers another injury, and he's out for the year. So now we're down to Brock Purdy, and we're fresh on a 7-game winning streak. For a team that had Super Bowl aspirations and hopes and dreams at the beginning of the season, how many of you would have guessed that the quarterback would not be Trey Lance, that it would not be Jimmy Garoppolo, but instead it would be some guy named Brock Purdy out of Iowa State University, the last pick in the draft, dubbed Mr. Irrelevant, from Gilbert, Arizona, by the way, which is the home of the Super Bowl this year, because quite frankly, I was not one of those people. I truly thought Trey Lance would lead this team to success this year, perhaps gain a wild card berth in the playoffs because I was high on the Rams. I thought these guys would play good enough to go back-to-back for the division title. And then when Trey gets hurt, I'm thinking, okay, fine. We got Jimmy Garoppolo, a proven veteran, has made the Super Bowl, has made 2 NFC championship games. And then he goes out. And this is the part of the story where I recognize, yeah, you know what, I am kind of nervous because I don't know what Brock Purdy's all about. Aside from seeing him play in the preseason, I'm thinking, man, like there goes our chances. It's not meant to be. And yet this guy comes out and balls out, torching the Miami Dolphins, torching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, heading into Seattle, weathering the storm, weathering the 12th man, and comes out with 3 victories, helping keep this streak alive. And many people out there are now dubbing this guy, the savior of San Francisco at this rate. But who's to say he can't do it? Everyone's eyes have been on the Philadelphia Eagles. People are raising questions at the Minnesota Vikings. People are wondering if Dallas is actually for real for now. And then you look at the AFC and you think, well, the Chiefs are great. It's Patrick Mahomes. Hey, how about those Buffalo Bills? They may be struggling, but they're still the Bills. And how about Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals? Can they make it back to the Super Bowl? Because now they're on a hot streak. They've won 5 games straight as of this recording. And then we look at the Niners. And we wonder, what are their limitations? They have a great defense. They have a good coach. They certainly have the weapons, so what's their problem? It's quarterback. It's all on their quarterback. And now they're on their 3rd string. So we're thinking it's over. But Brock Purdy, he's playing with house money. He's playing with house money. Because he's not supposed to be doing this. He's the last pick in the draft. He was the 3rd string. He shouldn't even be playing in the league right now. Because if it was up to the football gods or whatever, it would have been Jimmy or Trey playing right now. But for some reason, whether it's preordained destiny, he's the quarterback of the current Nfcwest champions. And now we're wondering, is this team still Super Bowl bound? Well, as long as Brock Purdy plays the way he's been playing and continues to protect the ball and leads this team into the red zone and then into the end zone and continues to beat the likes of the Miami Dolphins and the Buccaneers and the Seahawks, and now we have the Washington Commanders coming up, the Las Vegas Raiders after them, an Arizona Cardinal team that will be without Kyler Murray, and now they're guaranteed a spot in the playoffs. 3 games away from another playoff appearance. Can this team rally? Because if my math serves me right, they're on a 7-game winning streak. Let's say, just for the sake of this conversation, they finish the year out with wins. That's now 10 wins straight. Good enough for a 13-4 record. 10 games straight. And then assuming, let's say they get the second seed, right? They don't get the first week bye, because that doesn't happen anymore now that we've, have 7 teams per conference in the playoffs. So they have to face 3 opponents for the wild card round, the divisional round, and the championship round. So you're coming off a 10-game win streak. You now have to win 3 additional games. That's now 13 games in a row. And in order to achieve the dream of any NFL player, of any athlete, the pinnacle, the Super Bowl, that would mean you've won 14 straight games. That is unheard of. I can't recall the last time that was done. I mean, you look at the New England Patriots undefeated season in 2007. I know certainly the Carolina Panthers in 2015 did not do it into the playoffs. If my memory serves me correct, I believe they won 13 or 14 straight to begin the season and then suffered a loss to the Atlanta Falcons because of a late Julio Jones touchdown. But heading into the postseason, or even then, what is the longest winning streak of a Super Bowl champion? Because this team, I just don't know. There's something about it. And I've mentioned this in previous episodes. I've mentioned this in my personal life and at work. Is this a team of destiny? Because this is a team that, for better or worse, has been in the media's crosshairs. Whether it's the criticism of Kyle Shanahan and his inability to secure a win in a Super Bowl due to his play calling against the Chiefs in Super Bowl 54, or the collapse in Atlanta for Super Bowl 51, or perhaps even the one against the Rams last year's NFC Championship game. And even then, through all the controversy that Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance have been a part of due to the who will get the starting job and who will lead the franchise. And on top of that, you look at the limitations on the offense at that time, given that guys like George Kittle aren't getting the ball as much because they're tasked with blocking, and running backs not being able to stay healthy, and the whole Deebo Samuel contract situation that came out of this offseason. The Niners have had attention on them ever since Kyle Shanahan has stepped foot on Levi's. And for better or worse, they have been able to build a culture that is unselfish. Even throughout the course of this criticism, the culture that they've been able to build with guys like George Kittle, Nick Bosa, Jimmy Garoppolo, Deebo Samuel, it all stems from that, the gold standard that was established all those years ago with Bill Walsh, Jerry Rice, Joe Montana, Steve Young, Ronnie Lott. And to see now where they're at currently, and of course, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself and starting to talk about Super Bowls, but you have to enjoy these moments because you don't know when you're going to get them again. We were in the Super Bowl in 2019. And then after that, again, the whole season of injuries. And then we lost the NFC Championship game. So these don't come easy. They're going to have to fight for it. And sooner or later, Brock Purdy's going to have to face adversity. Because right now they're making it look easy. And whether it's this Washington game, this Raider game, or hell, even the Cardinal game, he's going to have to face adversity. He's going to have to really be tested because it's not all easy. If winning the Super Bowl was easy, anybody could do it. But it's not. You have guys out there like Dan Marino who's never won it. Guys like Drew Brees who only has one. It's not an easy feat. Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers combined for 2, 1 each. It's not easy. For those that are able to say that they have won a Super Bowl, they will tell you how much of a grind and how much of a struggle it is and the sacrifice that you have to put through in order to ensure that you're able to hoist that Lombardi trophy at the end of the season. So given that a guy like Brock Purdy has really taken to the league so naturally. And this guy, I don't see a sense of an ego. He recognizes his position. He says, hey, this was Jimmy's team. Hell, it's going to be Trey Lance's team. But who's to say I can't make a name for myself right now with this opportunity? Reminiscent of Nick Foles with the 2017 Philadelphia Eagles. It was Carson Wentz's team, but when he went down, everyone looked to Nick Foles like, okay, I guess this is your team now. And they go off on this Cinderella story, the underdog story, and they beat Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, Super Bowl 52. Defending world champions coming off of a 28-3 comeback the previous year. This is what sports is all about. It's about the stories that we share with one another, the underdogs and the unbelievable storylines, whether it's the last pick in the draft or the coach that can't get over the hump, or the debate of who's the better tight end, Travis Kelce or George Kittle. Oh, but Kelce has a Super Bowl. The storylines, the implications that come out of every Super Bowl. And given that it is here in Arizona, and you have a guy like Brock Purdy who's from Gilbert, Arizona, I just think the stars are aligning. And maybe that's just the optimistic in me, because I'm naturally a positive person. But why not? Stranger things have happened, as I mentioned. And as I bring this episode to a close, I'd like to know your guys' thoughts on the Niners right now and how it looks for a team, again, as I mentioned, that really shouldn't be performing the way it is with a third-string quarterback, let alone Mr. Irrelevant. What are your thoughts on this team, and what are your expectations heading into the playoffs? Obviously, we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves because there's still 3 more games in the season, but we're guaranteed a spot now. So as I mentioned, what are your guys' thoughts? What are your guys' expectations? How do you think Brock Purdy has been playing? Do you think Deebo Samuel will make it by the end of the season, or do you think we should hold him off until the first round of the playoffs? Again, as we bring this episode to a close, I'd like to give a major thanks to all you guys listening and continue to support the podcast. The words of encouragement and the support that I receive, it means the world to me. And once again, I appreciate you all. You can find me on all social media platforms at JustJose_3. Be sure to follow the podcast on Spotify or subscribe to the YouTube channel, J Area Podcast, where you can find each episode of this show. Once again, thank you guys for dropping by and hanging out with us. And if you enjoy these episodes, be sure to leave a like. Comment your thoughts on the NFL, especially the Niners. If you're not a Niners fan, cool. Let us know how your team is doing and what you think their expectations will be this coming postseason or off season if you're a Cardinals fan and you know the season's not going anywhere else. Subscribe to the channel again, J Area Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, my name has been Jose. This has been the J Area Podcast. And hey, we'll see you next week.